So it gives me great pleasure today to introduce our distinguished speaker. We are honored and happy to have with us Her Highness Princess Puyam Tirunal Gauri Parvati Bai of Travancore and her husband, Mr. Chemprol Rajarajavarma. The princess, as she's simply known in Travancore, belongs to a dynasty that ruled Travancore, a former princely state in the southwest of India, for over 1,200 years, and actually a lot longer if you go back into legend, if you go beyond history into legend. I must take a moment to explain the princess's name, which you have there, Princess Puyam Tirunal Gauri Parvati Bai. So the first part of the name, Puyam, refers to the asterism, which is a pattern of stars following a lunar cycle under which she was born. Tirunal approximately translates to auspicious day and is used in conjunction with royalty in Travancore. She also explained that since royalty had very few names, they had to distinguish themselves by using the asterism. So you'll learn more about that. The second part of her name, which is Gauri Parvati Bai, is her given name. So in her presentation and later in my introduction, you will hear names that thus are preceded by the asterism of their birth. So the princess is a niece of Maharaja Chittara Tirunal Balaramavarma, the last and highly revered ruler of Travancore. Modern Travancore and Kerala are in debt to him for enlightened administration, social reform that was really pioneering, and the establishment of higher education and industrial infrastructure. So we hear about the much-wanted Kerala model of development. You can directly trace that to the contributions of the Maharaja and his illustrious predecessors. I believe that if the same pace of progress had been maintained over the last 50 or 60 years, Travancore and Kerala would have been similar to Singapore and South Korea in terms of per capita income and its place in the global world of trade and commerce. As a child growing up in Trivandrum, I used to see the late Maharaja proceeding in his car in the morning to the Padmanabhaswamy temple, about 7 a.m. or so, and you could almost set your watch by it. I heard this endearing story many years later that once his car broke down on his way back to the palace. A lot of people stopped to offer him a ride, but he climbed into an auto rickshaw and went home to the palace. Now, apocryphal or true, this story speaks to his legendary humility and the respect he thus commanded from the people of Travancore. For the generation of my parents, the Maharaja was one who could do no wrong. My father, who was my source of Travancore lore, used to describe him as an admired and dashing figure, often seen in his youth on horseback in Trivandrum. In fact, my grandparents' place in Taikyat, Trivandrum, abutted the Maharaja's tutor's place. So I would hear reports from my father that he would remember him coming on horseback to see his tutor. When the Maharaja passed away in 1991, the outpouring of grief in Travancore was spontaneous. People said that they could only compare it to the grief felt when Prime Minister Nehru died, which is indeed a great testament to the love that people had for the Maharaja. The current Maharaja, who could not be here today, the princess is also the princess's uncle, the younger brother of the late Maharaja. The current Maharaja is His Highness Uttradam Tirunal Marthandavarma. Very sprightly at 90, but his doctors advised him that he couldn't make this trip. So the princess is the daughter of the Maharaja's sister, the late Maharani Kartika Tirunal Lakshmi Bai and Colonel Godwarma Raja of Punjar Palace. The marriage of her parents was occasion for great celebration in Travancore. My late father used to tell me of the wedding festivities that he got to attend sometime in the 1930s. So if the Maharaja was revered and loved, the princess's father, Colonel Godwarma Raja, known as Tirumeni, was absolutely loved by Travancoreans. He was a royal that the commoners adored. My father would tell me of meeting Tirumeni when he was a student and joined a university cadet corps that Tirumeni set up. Tirumeni was an avid sportsman who, among many institutions that he set up to promote sports, established the Flying Club in Trivandrum. The first time that I ever flew on a plane was a Trivandrum Flying Club aircraft, a single-engine plane, a Pushpak, when he asked a nephew of his to take me up for a spin. The princess's husband, Sri Chemprol Rajarajavarma, is from the Chemprol Palace of Haripad. We're delighted that he is here with us. And Mr. Varma, who has been a business leader with interests spanning plantations, logistics, and tourism. But his interests go far beyond business. He has a very keen eye for history and current affairs. There also seems to be no place that he has not been to, and no place where he doesn't have friends. The Princess and Mr. Varma have a son, Ashwati Tirunal Ramavarma, a renowned Carnatic musician, whom you actually saw and heard in one of the videos, and a daughter, Tiruvalluri Tirunal Lakshmi Bai. If I were to list the princess's public, civic, and business activities, we will be here all afternoon. She lives a rich and variegated life, combining many interests and passions: music, dance, education, society, family. The princess is a trustee of many charitable trusts established by the royal family of Travancore. She's chairperson of Kerala Travels Interserve Limited and has served on many public and private sector boards. She's the president of the Trivandrum Women's Club and has been passionate in the area of women's education. She's a graduate in science from the Maharaja's College of Women, Trivandrum. She also served for a year in her alma mater as an honorary lecturer. She is the honorary life secretary of its Old Students Association, and I know we have a number of women's college alumni here in the audience. I have one in my home, so. The princess is actively involved, along with the musician's son, in organizing the prestigious Swati Tirunal music concerts at the Kuthinamalika Palace. And these are held every January from January 6th to 12th. And actually, you saw some clips of that concert. And she herself is an accomplished dancer. Now, her interest in art and culture speaks to her heritage. In addition to her lineage from Maharaja Swati Tirunal, the great musician Maharaja, she is descended from the legendary painter Raja Ravi Varma. The princess will set out today for us the story of the royal family of Travancore, its distinguished history, its palaces and temples, its rituals, its duties, the demands of its destiny. She will talk to us about the Padmanabhaswamy Temple, now of storied wealth. On account of legal proceedings surrounding the temple, the princess will not be able to answer any more on the topic than she covers in her presentation. Now, it is my honor to present to you Her Highness Poyam Tirunal Gauri Parvati Bai, the senior princess of Travancore.
Very good afternoon to all of your friends. I'm honored to be at this prestigious museum and to just talk to you informally, because I'm not a speaker. It's not a prepared project that we are presenting before you. They asked me to tell you the story of my family. So I'm here basically as a storyteller, sharing some random thoughts with you, as I would with my grandchildren. They are the ones to whom I usually tell stories to. So this is a very illustrious gathering of grandchildren.
They're going to say, you don't look like a grandmother, you're too young.
Well, thank you very much. I have 3. No, way back in the late 1960s, I've been to this museum, but I seem to remember it was somewhere else. It was not here.
That's right.
The museum was in another location. So the first visit we made to San Francisco, we stayed with friends in Atherton, and we saw all the sites. We stayed a week, and we saw all the sites. And we've been coming back to the United States every year, not necessarily to the West Coast, but we started off with Anchorage, Alaska in 1967 and never looked back. We have covered 43 of the American states, and the Consul General told my grandson last month when we went for the American visa, they asked him, why do you want to go to the United States? And he said, I want to go with my grandmother, not with his parents. He wanted to come with us. And the consul told him, well, if you're going with your grandmother, you're going to go to states like Nebraska and Arkansas because she wants to cross them off her list. So you're not going to get to Disney World. That's what he told them. Now to come back to the subject at hand, you see up there is the beginning of it all. Now that's how all good stories start. Once upon a time, there lived a king. Well, the king in this case was Lord Padmanabha, to whom the state of Travancore was surrendered way back in the 1800s. But we go back a bit before that. In the Mahabharata, of which you know, I'm sure you all heard of the great epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, in the battle of Kurukshetra, there is mention of our ancestor. He was a Chera king, and he formed the first non-aligned policy in the country by not taking sides in the battle between cousins, but he didn't want to stay away, so he fed both armies impartially. That is about 4,000 and odd years ago. But let's come to more recent times. We have recorded history from 870 AD. Even though the dynasty is already mentioned during the Sangam period, which is 1st to 3rd century AD. I'm not very good with dates, so I have to look at the dates. I was never good with the numbers. Now, according to the historian Anis Jung, the Travancore family or the Wayanad family and the Udaipur family, they are Suryavamshis, and our family, we are Chandravamshis, descended from the moon. So we are the oldest dynasties in India. To come to more, shall we move on with the slides? So that this is the family deity, Ananta Padmanabha. This is an aerial view of the temple. We will come back to the temple. Actually, I'm here because of the temple. All this interest in our family has been generated because of the temple. And I'm aware of that. This is the family tree. It's too small for you to read, but I must say I rather like it. It's a nice family tree. And you know, in India, we come from a matrilineal family, where the inheritance is traced through the women. We were just discussing it over lunch. It's got to do with the mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down through the women. But I think our ancients knew that before putting it into scientific knowledge. And it was interesting that sitting in Arun's house, looking at his family tree, we discovered connections. So you could say he is a 5th cousin 7 times removed. But that's still family. So I come from a joint family where your relatives are special and they matter a lot. And for special occasions, everybody gets together and we really feel we belong to each other. But the history of the modern Travancore family starts with Aniram Tirunal Martandavarma. He was the architect of modern Travancore. Because before Travancore came, this is Patnapuram Palace, from where he set out to establish the new capital in Trivandrum. He consolidated the various little principalities. There were battles. And at the end of it all, like Ashoka, he got, this is an aerial view of the central courtyard of Patnapuram Palace. And he was tired of battle and blood. And he dedicated his entire state, which was from the land's end of India, Kanyakumari, up to Alway, which is on the border of Cochin state. That's Anirudhanal Martandavarma. He dedicated the entire state to Lord Padmanabha by an act that was called Trippadi Danam. Now this is one of his notable victories over the Dutch. There was a naval battle with the Dutch, and fortunately we won that one. And this is the surrender of the captain of the Dutch fleet, Eustachius Benedictus Delanoy. Delanoy and 28 men were taken prisoner of war. But the Maharaja said, what do I do with the Dutch prisoners? They probably don't like it here, it's too hot for them, and all the chilies in the food, so let's send them back. So he told them, you may go back. And Delanoy said, you know, we rather like it here and we'd like to live here. So they resigned their commission in the Dutch army and came back to integrate themselves into the Travancore forces, and their families came by ship to India. Mrs. Delanoy refused to come without her dog. So the dog came too, and they're all buried in what is now in the Tamil Nadu area near Padmanabhapuram. There is an American connection in this, in that Franklin Delano Roosevelt is a descendant of Eustachius Benedictus Delanoy. There's a family connection that way. We go on to, this is the Trippadidanam, or the formal offering of the state to Lord Padmanabha, who is the presiding deity in our temple. And this was not just an emotional handing over of the state. This was a political act. And all the state honors went to the temple, and the Maharaja ruled as the representative of the Lord. So you will find that in the Travancore processions, you have seen the exhibition. I guess you have all seen the exhibit. The Maharaja never rode on an elephant back or on a horseback, but he walked because he was the vassal of the Lord. So he walked with bare feet in procession. And all the honors were for the temple, not for the Maharaja. Following Anirudhanal Martandavarma was Kartika Tirunal Ramavarma, who was known popularly as Dharmaraja because he ruled during peacetime. He was able to consolidate the infrastructure of the government, and he also had time to devote himself to the fine arts. He was a composer in his own right. Very surprisingly, and for me it's a great thrill, that after the Natya Shastra of Bharata Muni, the second treatise on Bharatanatyam was written by this ancestor of mine, and it was called the Balarama Bharatam. Now why he chose to write about dance, I do not know, but it's a wonderful thing because I like to dance myself. He also composed Kathakali pieces, and the southern style of Kathakali was developed fully during his time. He made a treaty of friendship with the British because that was the time of Tipu Sultan. The attack by Tipu of Mysore took place during his time, and fortunately Tipu did not reach Travancore. He went back, and subsequently he was killed in the Battle of Srirangapatnam. After Dharmaraja, this is the first queen of Travancore. Her name was Rani Gauri Lakshmi Bai. She was a queen in her own right, a very young and powerful queen. She concentrated on bringing up her young son, who was later to become the famous Maharaja Swati Tirunal, the musician king. During her time, bonded labor was abolished. Way back, more than 200 years ago, bonded labor was abolished in Travancore. She died in childbirth, and she was succeeded by her younger sister, whose name I happen to bear, Rani Gauri Parvati Bai. She was only 13 when she had to take over as regent from her sister. She also had to bring up her sister's children. Now this Rani was very interested in education, especially in the education of women, which was a very revolutionary thing at that period of time in India. She helped establish many schools, government schools. They were even taught the fine arts. They had teachers to teach music and dance to children, paid by the state. Many schools were set up with the help of the European missionaries, and Travancore was very generous in giving land and money to the missionaries to set up educational institutions. She was followed by Maharaja Swati Tirunal, whose compositions you heard on the video a little while ago. He lived only for a period of 34 years. And in that 34 years, what he has accomplished was phenomenal, considering that there were no modern aids to assist him. He was a linguist. He could speak 6 or 7 languages very fluently. He continued to encourage education by establishing schools everywhere, following in his aunt's footsteps. He founded the observatory, the most modern observatory in India, importing instruments from Germany. He had a court of luminaries, poets, artists, artisans, linguists, pundits. They were all members of his court. He established the zoo in Trivandrum, the first printing press, modern printing press. All this was during his time, but it is for his musical compositions that he is best known all over. That's the printing press. He composed in Sanskrit, Malayalam, Telugu, Kannada, and also in the Hindustani style. And it is in his memory that we have this music festival that Arun was talking to you about. It's 1 week every year. Next year we will have it for 10 days because it is the bicentenary of the Maharaja. It is totally free to all music lovers, and it would give us great pleasure to welcome at least some of you to this festival. Keep the date in mind, save the date. It starts on the 4th of January and goes on till the 13th. We'd love to see you there. Swati Tirunal's younger brother, Uttram Tirunal, Martanda Varma, he was also a scholar in his own right, but he concentrated more on Kathakali. He was the first one who used the Western form of dress. See, till then they wore like robes, but he found the Western dress comfortable. So when I travel and I change from my sari and put on my jeans, I feel I'm doing nothing new. I did what my ancestor did 170 years ago. You be comfortable rather than fashionable. That was his motto, obviously, and he favored the Western style of dress for many of his activities. He was also interested in modern medicine, and he had an English doctor teach him medicine. He had his own little hospital in the palace complex, and there is a rather magnificent ivory skeleton, because those days they didn't want to touch dead bodies. So they had a skeleton made to scale of ivory, and that is in the Trivandrum Museum. After Uttram Tirunal came Island Tirunal. Island Tirunal was a great educationist, and it was during his time that Travancore was declared as a model or as an ideal state by the British government. The Secretariat complex was, the foundation for it was laid during his time. And the slide before that, which showed Queen Victoria, she is sitting on a chair made of ivory, which was specially carved for the Crystal Palace exhibition in London and sent as Travancore's contribution to the exhibition. And it is written to showcase the skills of our ivory carvers. It's a...
Travancore conch is above our head.
The Travancore conch. We have one in our museum which belonged to Uttram Tirunal's brother Swati Tirunal. It's actually bigger and better. But you didn't want to send it away for an exhibition. But this one, I went and saw it last year. In Buckingham Palace, they had an exhibition on the life and times of Queen Victoria, and this had pride of place in that exhibition. It's in Windsor Castle now. This is the Napier Museum. It's built of different colored bricks. That was during his time. And then came Vishakhan Tirunal. Vishakhan Tirunal was not only a historian, he was very much interested in agriculture. And it was during his time that tapioca was imported from South America and brought to Kerala as an alternative to rice, just in case, because rice is a very delicate plant, and they thought that for carbohydrates, there should be a second line of defense, and that was during his administrative period. Vishakhan Tirunal's time, the Birmingham Press in England minted a gold coin which was considered the most expensive in the world at that time. Vishakhan Tirunal was followed by Srimulam Tirunal, Ramavarma, and it was during his reign that the first democratic legislative assembly was established in Travancore. It was called the Srimulam Praja Sabha. And this time, the First World War broke out. And Travancore had a 21-gun salute, but the Maharaja refused to force his people to take part in the First World War. He said, they are free to go, but I will not have them conscripted into the British Army. And the British were not too happy about it. They said, if you don't send lots of soldiers to fight in the war, we will reduce your gun salute from 21 to 19. And he said, I don't care, because after all, it's just boom, boom. So whether you go 21 times or 19 times, but I will not force my people to take part in another country's war. They can go if they want. But so well, we got 19 guns. The college, I went to the women's college, that was established during his time. The postal department, the manuscripts library, all this came during Srimulam Tirunal's time. This is a scene of Trivandrum as it was in the good old days. We didn't have to worry about traffic. After Srimulan Tirunal, he passed away when his heir, who was my uncle, was only 11 years old. So we called her grandmother. Everybody was grandmother. Whether it was a cousin or a sister of your grandmother, it was all grandmother. So my grandmother, Sethu Lakshmi Bai, became the regent. And during her time, Gandhiji visited Trivandrum, and he asked her, will you open your temples to all Hindus? And she said, I'm only the regent. Here's the young man who's going to take over, ask him. And he had no hesitation in saying, once I'm the Maharaja, I will do it. And that was the historic temple entry proclamation, which happened when Chitra Tirunal was only 25 years old. This is my grandmother, Maharani Sethu Parvati Bai. She was a great influence on his life. She was a very modern thinking woman. She was way ahead of her times. She had great enthusiasm for traveling. Probably I inherited my gypsy feet from her and from my father, both of whom were great travelers. She and my mother were the first from our family to cross the oceans. It was not considered good form in those days to cross the seas. Orthodox families never did that, but they did. My mother was only 16 at that time. And between the two world wars, they visited Europe. They took the secretary and the maid and the cook and everybody, and they stayed in hotels which gave permission to her cook to make the Indian food in the hotel kitchens. And the cook was so delighted because everybody wanted little free samples. So everybody wanted a little taste, and they ran out of supplies at the end of 1 month. Supplies they had taken for 3 months were all exhausted at the end of 1 month. And Thomas Cooks had to rush Indian spices to England at that time. I remember my grandmother telling me all these wonderful stories.
Now, when you wanted to learn dancing, you went to her.
Well, dancing we were allowed to learn at home, but when I wanted to do a public performance when I was in college, there was a lot of opposition from the public, in the sense they said, girls from good families don't dance in public. So my grandmother and my uncle, they said, I don't see what your problem is. If we don't have a problem and she wants to take part in something in her college, I don't see why anybody should have any objection. So we started that when I was age 15 and never looked back. You know, she encouraged girls to go to the mixed college, because the university college had both boys and girls, and the girls were reluctant to go to a boys' college. So the first graduates were encouraged, we cannot say bribed, they were encouraged. The first girl graduates got little earrings made of rubies and diamonds when they graduated. This was to encourage others to follow suit. Now, during my uncle's reign, of course, the most important event in his whole reign was the Temple Entry Proclamation. But there were other things also: adult franchise, compulsory education. Every child of 5 had to go to school. Abolition of capital punishment for the first time in India. The Travancore University was set up at that time. The game sanctuary, which is a very beautiful area, the Periyar Game Reserve, it's a wonderful place where you interact with the nature, and it's balm for the soul. It renews your soul. It's a wonderful place. So the first game sanctuary was set up by him. The foundation of the medical college, with the children's hospital being the nucleus of it, that was during his time. And there was great religious tolerance, because I remember my uncle telling me, you had to go to school and learn how to be a Maharaja. It was not just an accident of birth. So he had to learn not only history, but he had to learn all comparative religions also. And we had, way back, more than 400 years ago, there was a strong Jewish community which lived both in Cochin and Travancore. And they say the longest continuous settlement of Jewish people anywhere in the world has been in Cochin. That's our neighboring state. And in the Jewish synagogue there are still copper plates which were given by Maharaja Ailin Tirunal. They are still there in the synagogue. Sadly enough, they don't have enough of an adult population for their religious observances now. Most of them have migrated, and it is very sad to see that. We had also Parsis. There was a thriving Parsi community in Travancore, and relations were very good among all the religions. Festivals were celebrated together. I remember as a child, during Christmas time, the various churches came with this huge candle to sing the carols, and we always enjoyed that because we got chocolates and cake after that. So another important reform during my uncle's time was public health insurance and debt relief to farmers. It's a big thing now, farmers committing suicide because of adverse weather conditions or because they can't meet their debts, but farmers' debt relief was there way back then. And another interesting thing is that the second flight, commercial flight in India, was from Bombay to Trivandrum. The first one came from Karachi, and even before Delhi got a flight, we had the flight. Tata Sons operated a Dakota plane, and that was in 1935. I don't know if there's a picture of the airport with the Dakota plane.
There's one later with Nehru.
In that, so the later one. This is the Templantary Proclamation, and that statue was erected by the public of Trivandrum of my uncle. And that's the Dakota plane. That's Maharaj of Cochin, my uncle and Jawaharlal Nehru on the Trivandrum airstrip. These are the religious ceremonies this is an Artingal temple. And later on, one of the finest things that the family did was when, during Mrs. Gandhi's time, the privy purses were going and they read the writing on the wall. They used their private wealth, my uncle and my grandmother used their private wealth to create certain charitable trusts. Because I remember him saying, we are tying our own hands because one day when it becomes necessary, we might feel tempted to use the money for ourselves. So we are really tying our own hands and setting up these trusts from which we cannot benefit. And this is an example of what came out of that trust, the Sri Chitra Medical Center, because we were losing our best brains to the outside world. They all went to further their studies, and there was no research. There were no research facilities in Kerala at that time. So a research wing was set up for this is the Heart and Neuro Hospital in Trivandrum. It's a national institute now, which deals only with the cardiology and neurology. And it has a wing, a research wing, which patented the Chitra valve, so we don't have to import heart valves. So that's basically the family. We had some very interesting, this is another American connection. You see here Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, who was a very distinguished visitor to our house. She took off her shoes before entering, and she had tea with us, and she liked the chocolate cake so much, she asked, "Can I have a second one?"
And you notice a beautiful woman on the second from right.
Those were the good old days, Arun. Let's not get depressed looking at those things.
I don't see much difference.
Oh, this is Indira Devi of Kuch Bihar, whose picture is in the exhibition here. She was a great friend of my grandmother, but Indira Devi was not in very good health, and she had to be in a wheelchair most of the time. But that didn't quench her indomitable spirit. She wanted to go places, she wanted to do everything. And my grandmother, she went with her on many of her little adventures, including her wheelchair trips, because Indira Devi, she said it was embarrassing for her to go in a wheelchair. Those days, you know, wheelchair access was not common, and you had to lift the wheelchair up the steps. There were no ramps to wheel the chairs up on, and she wanted to go to the Chilsea flower show, and she said, you know, I would be too embarrassed to go in a wheelchair, and my grandmother said, I'll go with you. So my grandmother, who was perfectly able to walk, she also rode in a wheelchair to give company to her friend, and they did many things. My grandmother, she said, you know, I never needed a wheelchair, but it was a very comfortable way of seeing things. And it made my friend happy. Another distinguished American connection again was Mrs. Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt came to lunch, and she wanted to learn about the matrilineal system, which she found very complicated and very confusing. So she tried to understand about it. She said, in Travancore, there's a Maharaja. His wife would not be the Maharani, but his mother. His son would not be the Maharaja, but his nephew. This is very, very confusing and very complicated, but one thing I do know, it's very good for the women. So we have had many distinguished American visitors come to us, and we have had a very happy relationship with the US. That's why we keep on coming back, 43 states, with 7 more to cross off. This is Koikal Palace in Nadamangad. This was from the 17th century, and a queen called Umayamma lived there. You see, the palaces those days were not ornate structures. They were just normal houses, maybe a little bigger than ordinary houses, but they were just houses where families lived and loved and grew up and died. So palaces are not like what you see in the exhibition. You see the ornate palaces of Rajasthan. That was a much more opulent lifestyle. We were it is like the city mouse and the country mouse. We were the country mice.
But the state of Travancore was very advanced.
It was advanced in education, it was advanced in a lot of things, but the lifestyle basically was very simple. You know, we sat on the floor. There were mats or carpets, we sat on the floor. Even furniture was a very, very late invention. We ate off banana leaves, which we still do. To this day, we eat off banana leaves. It is eco-friendly and a lot less washing up to do. Even chinaware and the dining table, all that came much later, probably during my uncle and grandmother's time, when we had to entertain overseas visitors much more regularly. But otherwise, it was an extremely simple lifestyle. The Maharajas wore no jewelry except for religious or state occasions. I don't remember seeing even 1 gram of gold on my uncle. Actually, it's much more comfortable not to wear jewelry.
There is a story of when Vasco da Gama met the Zammorin of
Calicut.
So the Vasco da Gama is in his entire uniform and the Zammorin is bare-chested. And the Vasco da Gama is asking his people, the king of this great place, he's not wearing anything. And the Zammorin is saying, what is wrong with this man wearing all this in such heat?
Probably. It made sense not to wear heavy clothes and jewelry and all that. We live in basically a warm climate, so it made a lot of sense not to be overdressed. This is Patnavapuram Palace, from where Marthandavarma started his conquests, and from there they moved to Travancore. It's a wonderful conglomeration of old buildings. This is the dancing hall, or the hall of performances. It's got a floor which is of a very, very high sheen. The contents of it, everybody says it, coconut shell was used, egg shell was used, lime was used, but they've never been able to replicate that floor anywhere. These granite pillars form the way to the shrine, the Saraswati shrine. The wood carvings were wonderful. One reason why we do not have too many palaces standing intact in our part of the world is they were constructed of wood. And wood was very susceptible to fire. So the fire hazard was there, and many palaces and buildings burnt down.
Picture of a beautiful woman here.
Oh, well, I didn't realize that one was there. This is the oldest part of the palace, Patnavapuram Palace. This is called a Nalikatta. A Nalikatta is an open space surrounded by 4 rooms, and this is typical of Kerala architecture. It's not necessarily from a palace, but they all had 3 distinct areas: the Padippara, or the entrance area, then the Nadappara, or the vestibule, and the Nalikatta, which is the inside living quarters. This is the Padippara, or the entrance, and the Nadappara, which is that long vestibule. And then inside came the Nalikatta. This is not necessarily, it doesn't have to belong to a palace. Many of the aristocratic houses were built like this. And you will see that the idea of a Kerala or Travancore palace is totally different from what you see as you proceed further upwards, further north. If you go to, let's say, Mysore or to Rajasthan, the palaces are much more ornate. And they're also much more westernized. This is a palace on the beach which was used for sporting activities. These are the corridors of the Kudra Malika. This is constructed during Maharaja Swatitirunal's time, and it was a strange construction because it faced the south. Normally our houses all faced east or west. The Indian construction, not just in Travancore, but the Indian construction was east to west. But this palace faced the south. They say that Swatitirunal had an inkling that he wouldn't have long to live, and the south is the direction of death. And the horses, 118 of them, they all faced the south. This is the Kudra Malika complex. The the Trivandrum palaces, part of it we have converted into a museum now, and they are just a conglomeration of houses, because each Maharaja built 2 rooms for himself, and that was called a palace. The construction was such that there was always light and air. You know, you had to have from north to south and east to west, you had to have a direct flow of air. So these rooms were always cool. Even though the windows were small, you see, it's slats really, not huge big windows. And these are the horses. But it was always airy and it was always cool. This is Krishnavilasam Palace, which was built by Mulantirnal, the Maharaja before my uncle. This is the Victoria Jubilee Town Hall, which was built to commemorate Victoria's Jubilee year, and that was the town hall where the first assemblies were held, and then when it became too small, the secretariat was built. This is home. This is Kaudiyar Palace, where we live. To you it might look like this is an aerial view made by the Indian Air Force. It might look like more like a palace than the other buildings did, but to us it is a big white house on a hill where we were born. My sister, my brother and I were born. Our children were born, all in this house. And the house looks big, but it's basically one room in the middle with one veranda behind, one veranda in front, and 2 courtyards inside. There's one courtyard here and one, well, I can't point because I don't have anything to point with. That's how it looked in the old days when we had an army of gardeners. Today we have the same problems that you all have, not finding enough good help. Domestic help is very, very rare, even in India. Now behind me you see a painting of done by my great-great-grandfather, who was the famous artist Raja Ravivarma. He was my grandmother's grandfather, and here again there is an interesting American connection. One of his paintings was exhibited in Chicago, where it won the gold medal. He never came, but his painting came, and there was, do you think we have a picture of that painting? There comes.
It's coming later, actually.
It's coming later? Okay. Well, when it comes to that, we'll point that out to you. This is another interesting feature of Kerala. These are snake temples or groves. This is every big house, not necessarily a palace, had this. This is a little conservation point where ecologically it was important to have a little area of wilderness. So they called it the sacred snake grove, where nobody was supposed to go in. Only tribal people were allowed to go in there, because the tribal people knew how to deal with the land. They could coexist with nature. So they were allowed to go in there. But this is Pattam Palace, where my uncle now lives. See, it's just a house. It's an ordinary house. This is the interior of Pattam Palace. By the way, he is 90, but in his heart, he's 19. And he was so looking forward to coming to San Francisco and to being with all of you. But he was very sick in January, end of January. He was extremely sick. And his doctor said, there's no way we're going to let you go. He was very disappointed. And I'm sure his He's with us in spirit. He must be thinking, I wonder what kind of a mess my niece is going and making there on my behalf. Now this is Kanagakunna Palace. Kanagakunna literally means hill of gold. Who knows, there might be buried treasure there. But it's called the Hill of Gold, and on it was constructed a palace specially to entertain overseas visitors. Meat was not, non-vegetarian food was not served in our houses. And the British wanted their, you see, this is taken at a banquet held in Kanagakunna Palace. So non-vegetarian food was served to guests in this palace. And interestingly enough, they tied a little red ribbon on the back of the chair to denote who got the chicken and the fish and all that. The vegetarians had a little green ribbon. And that's how the waiters could distinguish. This is the Navaratri Mandapam, where 9 days of music and religious ceremonies are held during the Dasara festival. The murals on the Navaratri Mandapam, the murals are painted using only natural colors. Only 5 natural colors are used for mural painting. And the Navaratri Mandapam, the acoustics are controlled by inverted earthen pots, which are kept on a frame. There's a frame above where the artists sit and sing, and there are inverted earthen pots which control the acoustics in the mandapam. This is Raja Ravivarma, whose paintings came to Chicago. This is the picture which won the gold medal. This is a portrait of his daughter carrying his grandson, and interestingly, when the picture was sent to Chicago, it had no dog. He put the dog in afterwards. And he's put in a totally strange dog. This is not even an Indian breed. It's a collie. So why he put that in, nobody knows. But he did. I guess it's an artist's privilege.
We'll fast forward.
Yes, we can fast. I don't know how we are doing for time. We're not doing too well. Yes, let's go to the... These are the art forms, the various art forms. The processions connected with the temple, which is what basically you wanted, which is what prompted this invitation. The temple has been the heart and soul of the family. This is the Arat procession. The Arat procession you can see twice a year. We have 2 important festivals. One which will now take place in April. The other one will be, we follow the Indian calendar, so it will be October, November. And then comes the Lakshadipam, which is once in 6 years when the temple is lit up with 100,000 lights. And that will be on the 14th of January 2014. The temple dates back to the Vijayanagaram period. Actually, it was another American art expert, Stella Cramrish from Philadelphia, who did a lot of research on temples. So the temple is from the Vijayanagaram period. It's Dravidian and Kerala styles of architecture are blended together, because the Gopuram, or this what you see with 7 tiers, that is the Gopuram, that is in the Dravidian style. And the top is like a boat. The main festivals are the Navaratri, as I said, and the Ulsavam, with all the art forms. We try to revive many of the old art forms. The trouble is, youngsters these days don't want to be artists. They all want to come to Silicon Valley and be IT professionals. So it's partly your fault that the art forms haven't stayed that long. Now the age of the temple, as I mentioned, is mentioned in the Puranas and epics like Mahabharata, and there are recorded references from the 9th century AD. From the Nalayara Divya Prabandham of Namalwar, there are inscriptions from the 10th century AD, and the largest collection of palm leaf records, over 10 million palm leaf records pertaining to the temple and the state, are found in Trivandrum, and that is the largest collection anywhere in the world. As I said before, the legal recognition of Lord Padmanabha as the ruler of the state, it gave him political status. The inner sanctum sanctorum, the deity is seen through 3 doors. And there is a huge granite mandapam, or what do you call a mandapam in a platform, which is made of one single stone. It's about double the size of this platform we are sitting on, or more than double the size of this platform we are sitting on. It's carved from a single stone. The stone carvings are wonderful. It's really poetry in stone. And the expressions, I don't know how people those days managed to get such expressive faces out of stone. The main idol has 12,008 saligramas. Saligramas, I don't know how to describe a saligrama to you. These are fossilized stone like rocks, and they came from the Gandaki river in Nepal. And over them is the main idol of Padmanabha, which is mistakenly referred to in many places, that the idol of Padmanabha is made of gold and covered with soot, so that invaders wouldn't know what it was made of. Even in the New York Times recently, there was an article which referred to the idol as made of solid gold. It is not made of solid gold. It is made of an amalgam, a composite of Ayurvedic herbs and substances, mainly 6 substances, important substances, and it's, by the time you finish the whole process, which takes about 2 to 3 years, it's like granite. But you cannot pour water on the main deity, and for the Abhisheka, there are the gold figures. Now what, I know that your questions will mostly be on the temple. So what I can basically tell you is that the reports the media has given are somewhat exaggerated and without much of a foundation, because one day I read in the newspaper that there are riches worth 4 million in the temple, and very rapidly over a period of 1 week it became 22 billion. So we'd like to believe that. These are, shall we take the questions, because I think we are running against time, aren't we, Arun?
Yes.
You are supposed to keep me on the straight and narrow.
I was just too engrossed in your story, so. Shall we go to the questions? Okay. Well, thank you for that fascinating overview. It's a really fascinating overview. I must say I did lose track of time because it was so interesting. So let's go to the questions. The first question is, many of the kings of Kandy in Sri Lanka married Malabar princesses. Were they from Travancore?
We have no record of anybody marrying into the Kandy family. I know this because when I went to Kandy, they said there were Malabar princesses who married into Kandy, and if you look at the jewelry and all that, it is very similar. But we have had no record of it. We know Sangamitra going to Sri Lanka, but that she was not a Malabar princess.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your wonderful story. Can you speak to the Maharaja's relationship with the British Empire?
They had a pretty good relationship, not always, because Maharaja Swatitirunal, for instance, had a very unhappy relationship with the resident at that time, General Cullen. But in the main, I think we had a good relationship with the British. It was also politically a good move to keep everybody happy.
In fact, in history, the fact that Tipu attacked Travancore was one of the tilting points
Towards the British, because first the Portuguese were there, then the Dutch, and the British came to sort of ease out the Dutch.
Here's a question that even I can answer. How are you related to Prince Ramavarma?
Oh no, I'm the mother. Or he's my son, whichever way you want to look at it. You know, my father always said, as you grow older, you became so-and-so's parent.
So, on the subject of parenting, etc., what attitudes and behaviors are you encouraging in your grandchildren which might be considered inappropriate in royal children?
Well, royal children are as normal as any other kid. The kid next door is the same as a royal child because they're all children. You know, when I came, I had this little list, go to the Disney store and get a pen with Tinkerbell on it. Unfortunately, they stopped doing pens with Tinkerbells on them. We have 3 grandchildren, grandson who's 15, who's coming with us in May to Florida to go to Disney World. He is very keen on football, so he's been selected to go for training, football training to Barcelona. 60 boys from all over India have been selected, so he's going to Barcelona for his football training, and then we'll go to Disney World. The other grandchildren, 2 little girls, they're twins, and they're only 7 years old. They do not approve of my travels. They say, why do you want to go without us? But we just let them be normal kids. We try to instill in them values which we believe are right. And you can do no more than to try and tell them what you think is right. You may not be right. You could be wrong some of the time. But we just let them grow up normally. I grew up normally, even though I was born and brought up in a palace. We were always, treated like any other children, except maybe we were a little more disciplined. You know, we were, my parents and grandmother, uncle, they were all very strict about time. If we were going somewhere, you had to be ready 10 minutes before time. And if you were not, you just were not taken. Nobody said, go and call the children, where are they? You were left behind. We were taught, nobody asked us, what do you want to have for dinner? Food was brought to you. You didn't have to eat everything. But what you took, you were not allowed to waste. When we left a room, we had to turn out the lights and the fans because you shouldn't waste electricity. So we were taught not to waste. It was a rather frugal way of life in a way because we were taught to be careful with everything. Probably because they lived through 2 world wars and they knew what it was to do without. So it's not all fun and luxury living in a palace. It's a big house to clean, to sweep, to take care of, to repair. Things are falling down always. Something is happening and you have to fix it. So it's just a very normal life.
There's a question about carving. Are there still carvers in Travancore? And what materials do they use instead of ivory? Is there a school or institute to keep these arts and crafts alive?
There are government-sponsored There's a School of Arts, yes.
Yes.
The School of Arts is still continuing, and instead of ivory, they carve with bone, with horn, and with wood. There is even a move that the elephants which die a natural death, we know we have a lot of elephants in captivity. So when those elephants die, instead of just destroying the ivory, the people should be encouraged to carve it again, because it's a wonderful art.
Now there's a historical question. Can you say a little bit more about Umayamma Rani?
Well, Umayamma Rani was before Marthandavarma, before Travancore was formed, and she lived in a very difficult time because she had to face a lot of enemies. Probably it was a male chauvinistic attitude. They didn't want a queen. They thought a man should rule. And she took the help of a neighboring prince, Keralavarma from Kottayam. He was invited to come and take charge of the Travancore army. And with his help, she was able to reconsolidate her position as queen. She was a queen in her own right, Umayamma Rani. And that palace is a much overlooked place. I've gone there myself a couple of times, but it's way off the beaten track of tourists.
How many elephants are there in the royal household, and how many in the Padmanabha temple?
Easy to answer, one. And it's a she. The female elephants are very gentle. And the one in the Padmanabha temple, her name is Darshini. She takes part, and she has a nice job. All she's got to do is get dressed. And she's very, very careful. There are a lot of children running around her. She looks where she's going. She's extremely kind and gentle animal. If you come to Trivandrum, you can feed her. You can give her bananas.
So question, can you say anything about how the temple treasures were found?
Oh, the temple treasures were not found. They were there always. And it was well known. All the temple staff knew about it. We knew about it. We knew exactly where it was. There are palm leaf records showing various instances when these items of jewelry were offered to the temple. We have offerings from Dutch, Portuguese, British, mainly soldiers and sea captains. So this is all recorded. It's just the press that made it appear like one fine morning some hidden treasure, like pirates' treasure, was discovered. But it was always there.
I have a number of questions, but in the interest of time, I have to just come to an end here. However, a couple of questions. One is, who will be the next ruler of Travancore?
Well, after my uncle, it should be my brother.
And the last question is a tricky question.
Okay.
What is your favorite state to visit in the US?
Now, that is difficult because I'm sitting in California, so I should say California. But I must say we enjoyed the very first time we set foot on American soil was in Anchorage, Alaska. And we have always enjoyed Alaska very much. We keep on going back there. My husband likes Hawaii. It's very much like Kerala.
So I think there were a couple of other questions. Maybe after the talk you can come up to the princess and speak to her. But I want to say that I really enjoyed this. I must say I feel very honored to be your seventh cousin, however many times removed. Thank you so much for this.
It was a great pleasure.